It's common knowledge that before people went to watch football, cricket or the races, they went to cheer on the athletes of the time, knights at the local tournaments. Here, knights would compete in various disciplines like hand-to-hand combat, tests of accuracy and various other skills. But of course, the pinnacle of the medieval tournament was the joust, the courtly battle in which the flower of chivalry tried to unseat their opponents in a show of martial skill and courage, all while also trying to impress the fair maiden in the stands. This skill left such an impression that many modern stories set in the Middle Ages or a medieval-esque setting will often contain or even revolve around the joust at a tournament. But here's the thing. If you travel back to the Middle Ages and you meet, for instance, William the Marshal, very much the goat, as the kids say these days, of tournaments. Goat, I really don't like that word. And you tell him how you're excited to see him joust in the tournament. He would probably go, "Really? Ugh, young people these days. Alright, that's it lads, we're done here." Mind you, that is the best case scenario. Worst case, he'd hunt you down for being a demonic abomination who just emerged from the depths of hell. But anyway, the joust was, for most of the Middle Ages, not that big. So, what was the center of a tournament if it wasn't a joust? And why do all our stories these days feature joust so prominently? Well, the answer to all of that and more will be revealed starting now. To explain why jousting is a bit overhyped in present-day medieval fiction, it's best to start at the beginning. The origin of tournaments. We don't really do war and martial history here, hence why all the weapons today will be played by food items. But we do need to provide a bit of background. We don't know exactly when tournaments started, but the dominant theory that we came across attributes it to this. Yes, that guy there with the spear, or lance to use the proper term, tucked under his arm. This tucked lance is known as the couched lance. Before the couched lance, lances were carried overhand or underhand. Neither of these fully benefit from the speed and power of the horse, as the thrust is still done by the rider. The couched lance, however, does get all that horsepower. Yeah, it kind of works. Or at least so I've been told. As I said, we're not really a fighty channel. Go watch Blumenegg for those things. It's what I do. The thing we are interested in is that the couched lance required formations with other knights for optimal effect. So you had to be organized, practice together and get along. However, this is an era where there are no centralized standing armies to organize such trainings. So instead, knights agreed to meet up and play war games. No, not those war games. Real war games, like the ones modern militaries sort of still do in joint exercises. So I suppose it is like that, but less dice and on a 1-to-1 scale. Knights would meet up on a big field, like really big, sometimes encompassing entire villages, and fight without the intent to kill, but still fight. This big fight became referred to as the melee. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Entire bands of knights would, in formation, charge at each other and fight to the just not death. It sounds brutal because it was, but that's because it was a combat sport with a bag of money at the end. The goal was not to kill, the goal was to get paid. Once you had taken another combatant prisoner, you took them to a neutral area, somewhere designated on the battlefield, usually a commandeered barn or something. And there you would, and this is important, negotiate a ransom in real money. This is really the crux of the whole tournament issue. You see, knights were paid by their lords, but they also made money from plunder. When you're not fighting real wars, you needed something to compensate for the gap in income. And one of the most popular ways to do that was to have the losers, those who were captured, pay the winners, those who caught them. Rich knights would have better gear and training, so catching them was a bigger challenge. But they could also pay bigger ransoms, which would then create some interesting dynamics. If you showed up all kitted out, you would look intimidating, but the opposing side would also see you as a big, juicy payday. But more on the technicalities and cash earnings from tournaments in a bit. For the first few decades or so, tournaments were just that. Training sessions with a bit of financial incentive to tide knights over between wars. And there were plenty of wars. However, at the end of the 11th century, Pope Urban II would do something that would really cement tournaments in European culture. He called the First Crusade. Suddenly, all the knights that had been fighting each other, a sin, could go to the Holy Land and fight someone else. Rather than damnation, they were told this would get them into heaven. Pretty much an offer one couldn't refuse. Urban II had lots of motives for calling the crusade, but one of them was essentially giving knights something to do. You see, as the early Middle Ages moved into the High Middle Ages, central authority started growing stronger, and there were less small feudal wars. And so, there would often be knights just sitting around. These men were trained their entire lives to fight. So, when not busy fighting wars, they weren't the best behaved. Remember how we said how they relied on plunder for a part of their income? Ergo, the church reasoned, if we send them off to kill some Turks, everybody's happy. Well, everybody Christian, that is. There was one problem. The First Crusade was successful, so a lot of them came back. Only now, they were all convinced that because of their participation in the crusade, their ticket to heaven was assured. Also, to prepare for the crusade, lords and princes had expanded their retinues, so there were even more knights running around. Oh, and plenty of them now had capes. No, seriously, while in the Levant, they had seen Saracen riders with surcoats, and they must have all thought, damn, that looks really cool, and adapted the practice in a way. So now you had a continent full of well-armed knights, all of them itching for a fight, and because of the growing influence of central authorities, there was less fighting to do. So what did these knights turn to? Well, you've guessed it, tournaments. So, is this when tournaments began to resemble what we all think they are? You know, closed pitch, stands on the side, and a fair maiden cheering on her favorite knight? Nope, far from it. If anything, they got even bigger and wilder. This era is the pinnacle of the big melee tournament. Tournaments happened all over Europe, but the biggest and best happened here, north of Paris, south of the Duchy of Flanders. Lots of flat land and close to the seats of those who would take an interest. Even though all of this was a step forward in the evolution of tournaments, they were nowhere near the fantasy joust yet. Although, apparently, one day, two noble ladies showed up to one of these high medieval tournaments, which wasn't the norm at the time, so we assumed that everybody was just very confused. One way in which they did start to resemble modern spectator sports is that the elites got involved and became famous heroes or villains of the sport. Whether someone was regarded a hero or a villain depended, of course, on whether or not he was on your side. One of the famous elites who got involved in the tournament circuit was Henry the Young King, a ruler with more money than acumen who loved tournaments. But he wasn't very good at them at first. He would show up decked out in the finest armor and surrounded by famous knights and men-at-arms. He and his team, so to say, were such easy targets that opposing knights would see him coming and already start to divide the ransom amongst themselves. But hey, tournaments were supposed to get knights to fight as a cohesive unit. And in that sense, we can say that Henry did his part. One of the villains of the tournaments in the late 12th century was Philip of Flanders. This channel is a family-friendly channel, so I have to watch my language, but Philip was one of these. Yes, this is an outhouse. Now think of the ruder word for this. You can hear it in the phrase, "He is built like a brick." That's Philip. In football, they also refer to this sort of antics as the dark arts, which made this guy a veritable necromancer. Philip would show up to tournaments with his entire retinue, which, given Flanders' wealth, was just short of a full army, and say, "Oh, don't mind me, I'm just here to watch." And then, when the melee got underway and the two sides had already gotten pretty knackered, he would suddenly declare, "Oh wait, I'm in anyway," and charge in to claim victory. However, there were also stars. One knight in Henry the Young King's retinue was the type that these days would be referred to as the GOAT. I still don't like that word. I really don't like it. William Marshal, or Guillaume le Maréchal, as he would have probably called himself, started life as a relatively poor knight, a landless one. He fought his fair share of actual wars, but he excelled at tournaments. Not only was he what the kids call these days an absolute unit, he was also a master equestrian. William had the gift of being able to ride next to a horse and just hijack it. I've never ridden a horse, but apparently this is a rather difficult move. At one point, he asked Henry whether he could get some time off from his actual military duty to go and do the tournament circuit. Henry let him. And along with his partner, William went off and did the tours and captured 103 knights in just a few months. Becoming so loaded, he needed his own clerk to tally up his spoils. Funny side note, while he was away on that tour, he was a freelance. And yes, that is where the term freelancer comes from. We might do a separate video on William or Guillaume. This guy is something. Although it must be said that some theorize that Henry the Young King's bad fortune in tournaments was due to his key players, most famously being William Marshal, often just running off to go get theirs, leaving their lord vulnerable in the process. Not everyone was that keen on the tournaments though. For the peasant, tournaments mainly meant crops destroyed by rampaging knights. The church wasn't too keen on tournaments either, with their entire identity being tied up to reducing violence. The church didn't have the outright power to ban tournaments, but Pope Innocent II at the 1130 Council of Clermont issued the 9th canon, which said, "We firmly prohibit those detestable markets or fairs at which knights are accustomed to meet to show off their strength and their boldness, and at which the deaths of men and dangers to the soul often occur. But if anyone is killed there, even if he demands and is not denied penance and the viaticum, ecclesiastical burial shall be withheld from him." Pope Innocent really hated tournaments, because a few years later, at the Second Lateran Council, he repeated this ban verbatim. But hey, Innocent wasn't even an uncontested pope, so maybe the other popes were a bit more... Nah. Sadly, the Third Lateran Council reaffirmed the ban, in memory of Innocent no less. This is also one of the earliest instances we have of tournaments actually being explicitly referred to as tournaments. In essence, this ban meant you can go to a tournament, detestable things that they are, but if you die there, no proper burial and therefore no heaven for you. This was strong condemnation, because people did die. It wasn't the goal to kill each other, but this was an era before penicillin or antibiotics. so even the smallest wounds could end up fatal. Which does make you think, if you were to travel back in time and gift a medieval lord with a formula for antibiotics, it would almost be the equivalent of giving somebody a super soldier serum. If you like thinking of things like that, we have a little book tip for you. Because this video is in part brought to you by Hungry Minds and their book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization, which poses the question, if we were to start all over, how would we go about it? The book, which arrives beautifully packaged, is a coffee table book for those of you who want something more engaging and challenging than just pretty photographs. It's filled cover to cover with gorgeous hand-drawn illustrations of all the things you would need to start all over. Oh, look! Here's the section on how to make a rudimentary penicillin, showing that this would be possible in the Middle Ages. For all you world builders out there, this contains great food for thought if you're building a world where discoveries didn't go in the same order as they happened in ours. The book also contains a quest which requires you to really investigate all the drawings in minute detail. If you're successful, you'll be invited to join the Order of Seekers. Sounds cool, doesn't it? He is desperate to join. So, if this sounds like something for you, head over to Hungry Minds, link in the description, or via this handy dandy QR code, and use our promo code INTERBURNER10 to get your copy of The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization. So, where were we? Oh yes, knights and low nobility loved tournaments, while the church and the peasantry were less keen. The higher nobility and royalty found themselves in a bit of a dilemma. It gave their knights an income, keeping them from harassing them for cash, and it kept them busy and well trained. In addition, if your retinue did really well on the circuit, it reflected really well on you as their lord. On the other hand, tournaments were sometimes used as an excuse to put troops in place, and it sometimes sparked a real conflict, which got you the church's ire. Some kings would, like the King of France, just ignore tournaments. Laissez-faire. Don't ban them, but don't indulge them either. And don't even think about participating. A game where the king can get hurt? Jamais. Other kings and lords would outright ban them. However, some kings would take a more proactive approach. For instance, when Richard the Lionheart became King of England, he was under some pressure to ban tournaments like his predecessor Henry II had done. However, as a member of the French chivalric class, he didn't want to, so he came up with a compromise. Tournaments in England were confined to specific areas, and you had to pay to host or participate, and follow the rules as he had prescribed them. Yes, there were stars of the game and villains of the game, and in this world, Richard the Lionheart became the precursor to FIFA. His coat of arms was this, and the badge of the Football Association, which is where the FA in FIFA comes from, is this. Intentional? No, not at all. The FA just takes their badge from the English part of the royal coat of arms, but still, pretty funny in this context. So this is what tournaments were during the High Middle Ages, roughly between 1100 and 1300. So how did they become the smaller jousting sessions in a castle courtyard or market square, with nice comfy stands for spectators we know from our favourite stories? Well, there were already similarities. Firstly, the joust was already a thing. However, it wasn't the main event. It was the thing that knights did as the tournament was getting ready and other knights were still arriving. They had to do something in anticipation of the big melee, so they jousted and did smaller one-on-one fights. Think of these as like the weigh-in before a boxing match. You know, the combatants getting a feel for one another. Or maybe, if you take them less seriously, they were like the penalties that kids get to take at halftime against the club mascot. You've seen them. Just depends how much you buy into it. Another thing that was already developing around tournaments in the 12th century were the markets and fairs. Knights didn't come to tournaments alone. They brought an entire retinue. Sensing opportunity, armorers, blacksmiths, saddle makers would descend on the location of the tournaments looking to sell their goods and services. All these people would get hungry and thirsty, so food and drink vendors would also show up, and before you know it, the heart of a tournament had become a market or a fair. Remember when the church first banned tournaments? They referred to them as market and fairs at first, so these were likely already pretty established. Now, and to the one guy writing the comment right now, well, actually the church's ban explicitly bans tournaments than joust, so the joust must have been more important. No, this translation is wrong. When you look up the Council of Clermont and the Second Lateran Council, you will often get this translation. However, the Latin originals don't mention these words about jousts. We trace this translation to Norman P. Tanner in the 1970s, and it looks like he, or someone earlier, just inserted the words there as a way of clarification. And now this erroneous translation is all over the internet. Goes to show how important it is to double check sources. Anyway, at these evil fairs and markets, there would be food, and we are still a cooking channel. Well, mostly. Sort of. Food, drink and leisure. There you go, that fits. Because this was food for markets and fairs, we're going to look for what is, in essence, mobile food. Or, as it's referred to these days, street food. The Middle Ages had plenty of street food. So there are many things we can make, but we're going to stick with a quick, simple, high-protein snack. Because this video is long enough, so we're making beef skewers. Skewers were popular, as we can see on the Bayeux tapestry, for instance. And yes, we did want to film this at the actual tapestry now that it's here in London, but those tickets went real fast. We are again taking a recipe from Maggie Black's The Medieval Cookbook. This one is from the late Middle Ages, so not bang on, but close enough. We're rubbing the meat, which is a lovely cut of chuck, in some poudre douce. Check this video on how to make that. And then grilling them in our oven. Normally this would be done over a charcoal grill, but we don't have a garden, so oven it is. We could also do this on our cast iron grill pan, but the baste is a mixture of Seville oranges, also known as bitter orange, and verjus. So that would be an assault on that pan's poor seasoning. If you have a different type of grilling pan or you leave out the baste, you can also pan fry this. And there you go, some lovely street food fit for a night. If you want to see us make more videos on historical concession stands and street food, why not subscribe? And when you're down there, feel free to leave us a like or maybe even join the channel for exclusive videos. Cheers! Near the end of the 13th century, we do see tournaments beginning to change. There are multiple reasons for this, and there is still historical debate on the subject, but here's our take. In the late 13th century, the concept of chivalry, as in what makes a knight, started to shift. Up until the late Middle Ages, a knight was first and foremost a warrior and soldier, and that's what they were seen as. They were a strategic asset, a bit like a tank in modern warfare. If you had enough good knights, you would win wars, and tournaments made sense in this setting. They were, in essence, still war games. However, in the late 13th and especially 14th century, this would start to shift. The meta of heavily armed and armoured cavalry came to an end. In 1302, a small rebellion by Flemish cities managed to beat a collection of French knights who were collectively referred to as the flower of French chivalry. The rebellion itself was soon put down, but the air of invincibility that knights brought was punctured. It wasn't gone yet, but it wasn't perfect anymore. We won't go into too much of the martial details here, but war became more professional, and there was a big shift towards well-trained infantry. I'm sure there's some military history boffins out there who would love to give more detail down below. So for all of you, go on, fill your boots, but please, do cite your sources. This along with the growing power of central rulers, meant less small feudal conflicts and resulted in knights slowly becoming more and more ceremonial. We do have to stress, this wasn't one day everything is knights and the next day they're all gone. This was a very slow shift and would go on well into the early modern era. Point is that the knights' influence on warfare slowly waned, and this probably had an effect on tournaments. In addition to actual warfare becoming less dependent on knights, the idea of knights also changed. Larger-than-life champions like William Marshal had inspired writers like Chrétien de Troyes to write stories such as the story of Lancelot. And these stories in turn started to have an impact on how knights were expected to behave. This had some weird effects. For example, at the start of the 100 Years' War, the war that pretty much ushers in the late Middle Ages, some English knights, high on Arthurian legend, would ride into battle with one eye covered, just to be extra chivalrous. As you might expect, it did not go well. Turns out, that perception is quite a good thing to have when dodging lancers coming at you. Knights still did tournaments, but these two began to reflect the changing times. The melees became smaller, now allowing for people to watch from the top of nearby buildings or specially constructed viewing stands. And with this more theatrical setting, there was a growing emphasis on the tournament as a spectacle rather than a war game. This obsession with the imagery of heroism of a bygone era wasn't limited to just the knights. The audience got in on the action. In 1300, yes, already that early, a tournament was held in Bruges, and knights from all over Western Europe attended. The Queen of France, who was present, remarked that she was surrounded by queens, because all the ladies who had shown up were role-playing as queen to invoke the oldie-worldy atmosphere of it all. Yes, in 1300, peak Middle Ages, people were LARPing the earlier Middle Ages, or at least some romanticized version of it. Now, if that doesn't boil your brain, try this one. People were doing Ren Fair before the Renaissance. And, as you could imagine, these tournaments became cleaner and less violent. And the jousting became a lot more prominent, slowly displacing the melee entirely. A good indicator of how tournaments were evolving is in 1316, when Pope John the 22nd lifted the ban. If the 14th century was the slow death of the big melee tournament, in the 15th it was fully dead, it was gone. Many tournaments were now held in confined pens, making them easily observable from the stands and overall safer for those participating. At this point, it also wasn't about capturing opponents for ransoms anymore, but about gaining the favor of the crowd. Yes, the big manly fight was turning into a bit of a beauty pageant. To go back to the little time travel thing we started with, if you were to take William Marshal to these late medieval and early modern tournaments, how gutted would he be? I can just imagine his outrage. No hostages, stands for the fancy folk to watch from, confined to a small pen along a tilt, no villages ransacked or vineyards trampled. I'm telling you, nah, game's gone, we're done here, game's truly gone. Get the thing, there we go. Tournaments would, from here on, always evoke a bygone age perceived as more heroic. You can even make the argument they still do. Even at the time, the lost heroics of knights was bemoaned. For example, in 1484, really the tail end of the Middle Ages and the dawn of the early modern era, William Caxton would write, "O ye knights of England, where is the custom and visage of noble chivalry that was used in those days?" I think that means those, right? Yeah. His solution to bring back those chivalric values? More jousts. Caxton spent much of his time translating French texts about chivalric codes and honor and all that stuff. He probably didn't realize that a century and a half earlier, knights and tournaments were very different. Jousting tournaments would keep going until deep in the early modern era, becoming more and more LARP for the elites, even having kings themselves compete. However, when Henry II of France died in a joust and Henry VIII of England got heavily wounded, the role of the actual combat, the poking, was even more reduced, essentially becoming just pageantry, until a revival in the 20th century. But we'll leave those to the living history channels. So why is it that when we think medieval tournaments, we immediately go to jousts? Well, this is our theory. Our idealist image of the Middle Ages was crafted by Romantic writers in the 19th century. These writers were probably getting most of their influences from late medieval and early modern texts. These texts in turn were romanticizing a previously bygone era of heroic knights. So it's an embellishment of an embellishment, so to speak. Double whammy. This is also why we have this idea of knights' armor being bulky and restrictive, even though real medieval armor was actually pretty easy to move around in. There are plenty of living history people out there proving that each day. Go look them up, they're easy to find. Early modern jousting armor, however, only needed you to go in a straight line. So that was very stiff and bulky. And guess which suits of armor would be around for Victorians to gawk at a few centuries later. When used for fantasy stories, this is all harmless. But in my opinion, there is a real treasure trove out there for world builders and writers. I want to see and read a story about a real big medieval tournament. Problem being that if you write the story of William Marshal, the battle might lack a bit of epicness, as he just rides up, snatches the rein from the hero's hands and then leisurely guides him and his horse away. Okay, this might need some work. Please consider subscribing or becoming a channel member if you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching.